A few days ago, Hugo took out a pen and began to write a letter to Vicar. He knew that being a top-ranked graduate, the fang that Vicar was capable of making was a careless seventh technique. To perfect this technique, he had to become a sword master. Hugo was in his office, and while the sunlight was coming through the window, he continued writing. He was writing the process he had gone through to become a sword master. Hugo began to imagine himself holding the sword and with eyes shining with determination. He had become swordmaster shortly after Vicar was born. The image of Roxana and Penelope came to Hugo's mind. After losing them, he fell into despair and spent his days obsessed with the sword. Hugo spent all day swinging the sword in the training wing. Hugo began training at a very young age until he became an adult, and gradually his movements became more precise. At that time, his rank was top-ranking graduate, but to become a sword master, he had to wield his sword every day. After arduous training, Hugo gripped his sword tightly until several seconds later he opened his hand, letting the sword fall to the ground. Hugo began to observe his hands and his eyes widened in desperation, making him sweat. He had trained so much that he had calluses and scratches on his hands. But no matter how much he wielded the sword, he could not reach the level of sword master. With the feeling that he was clinging to a burning nail, he checked the books in the library of 10,000 epistles and found it, the words of an ancient swordmaster who left them for his descendants. He opened the book, which contained a magic circle, and according to the book, to become a graduate one must discard all emotions. However, to become a swordmaster, one must recover their emotions. Hugo's personality began to shatter like a mirror. He decided to follow the words and worked hard to learn happiness, anger, sadness, and pleasure. He tried various ways of being happy, angry, sad, and excited. Hugo put his hands over his face and started to go crazy, since trying forcefully to create emotions had severe side effects. From a certain point on, he laughed when he needed to be angry and frowned when he needed to be happy. It had destroyed the way in which he expressed his emotions. That was how, little by little, the path toward becoming a sword master became a labyrinth with no exit. To satisfy his thirst that could not be quenched with his sword, he used his power to revive the family and had many children to increase his power. The image of his children crawling across the ground that was full of swords came into Hugo's mind. Following the rules of the family, he sent his small children to the cradle of swords. Hugo began to observe his children, and his eyes widened with surprise and fear as he had a realization in a place he did not expect. One of his children had jumped into the water. Hugo, the butler, and the others who were on the shore went on alert. He did not know for what reason a small baby, who knew nothing, would struggle so desperately, nor why the baby endured the pain of water seeping into his body. Hugo put his hand over his chest and his eyes widened in confusion. Watching that scene made his heart race, and mana began to emerge from his heart, the pleasure of finding great talent, the anger at sending a young man to such a horrible place, the sadness of seeing an injured youth, the joy of looking hopefully at that child's future consumed Hugo's mind. Without hesitating even for a second, Hugo entered the water amid those complex waves of emotions, and without hesitating even for a second, grabbed the child by the foot and pulled him out of the water. With this event he had his realization, and found out next day that he had become a sword master. Back to the present, Hugo continued writing the letter with a serious expression, including Pomeranian and becoming a sword master were things that Vicar had given him. He revealed that the path to becoming a sword master resided in how one was able to feel complex emotions. He trusted that Vicar could reach that level. Back to the combat, Sarah sent mana into her scythe and swung it forcefully, launching a flurry of slashes. Vicar put his arms in front of his chest and using the Beelzebub sword blocked the attack, and his eyes filled with surprise, realizing that she was very strong. Vicar's eyes began to shine with rage, realizing that Hugo had become a completely different person from his previous life. While the demon Sarah's eyes were shining with evilness, with a smile, she clenched her fist and summoned a powerful magic circle. To break Sarah's magic, Vicar had to reach the level of sword master, and now that he no longer had the power of the saintess, he had to come to his own realization. Sarah extended her hand, and just then, a magic circle appeared on the ground, and from it emerged spikes made of skeletons, which struck Vicar's body directly. causing him to be thrown into the air. Our boy clenched his teeth and began to bleed from the mouth, just as Hugo had said. Anger and sadness existed within him. The spikes pierced Vikar's body, leaving a deep wound in his chest. Our boy's body began to bounce against the ground. Upon seeing this, Sarah's eyes began to shine with joy and a smile appeared on her face, since she thought that Vikar was very weak. But soon her smile disappeared and her eyes filled with rage, causing her to clench her fist tightly. Despite having deep wounds and cuts all over his body, Vikar stood up, and while his eyes were shining with confidence, he began to stare at Sarah with an excited smile. In this fight for Vikar it was impossible to feel joy and pleasure. Upon feeling Vikar's gaze, Sarah became enraged and using all her strength, launched several slashes toward Vikar. Just before he could react, the slashes were already in front of his face. Vikar's attention was fixed on them and his eyes widened in fear and surprise. The attack was so fast that Vikar had no time to do anything about it, and he took the full brunt of the attack, creating a curtain of smoke. Sarah, who had the scythe stuck into the ground, began to observe our boy in silence. Vikar's body was thrown into the air along with debris. Demon Sarah's attack had cut off one of our boy's legs, while blood was emerging from his wounds. Vikar couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious. With the little energy and strength that Vikar had, he used Baskerville's seventh technique and gaining momentum against the rocks appeared in front of Sarah. Vikar began to stare at her, and while his eyes were shining with fury, he prepared to attack. Sarah turned around and upon seeing that Vikar was ready to attack, went on alert. With a murderous gaze, Vikar forcefully swung the sword. The attack landed squarely against Sarah's head, but then his sword bounced off. Seeing this, Vikar's eyes widened in confusion and many questions came to his mind. Meanwhile, on the other side, Sarah couldn't help but smile. With an arrogant expression, she called Vikar piece of shit, realizing that he had no ability to learn. She grabbed Vikar by the face, revealing that it was impossible for him to break her armor. Vikar grabbed Sarah's arm and his eyes filled with fear and surprise. While Sarah's eyes were shining with evil, she threw Vikar, causing his body to crash against the ground, destroying it into pieces. According to her, Vikar's attacks were not powerful at all. She grabbed Vikar by the neck and while her body was releasing a demonic aura, she closed her eyes and with a smile couldn't help but wonder what it was that Vikar was trying to do. Vikar no longer had the strength to resist. Sarah stepped forcefully on Vikar's chest and used her powers, causing a magic circle to appear under her feet and from it hands began to emerge. She mocked Vikar, questioning if he really believed that Camus was going to wake up and resist the demon's contract. Several red hands emerged from the magic circle, and one of them grabbed Vikar by the head. While smoke was coming out of Vikar's nose, he couldn't help but feel furious. Little by little, the hands began to cling to Vikar's body. In an instant, our boy was completely immobilized. Sarah's eyes began to shine with joy. She stood up, extended her hand toward the sky and with a smile asked Vikar to try resisting the next attack. The magic circle appeared in the sky and from it a horde of hands shot out toward Vikar. The hands struck Vikar's body with force, creating a large curtain of smoke over the area. The attack had been so powerful that there was now a crater in the ground and in the middle was Vikar. Our boy had lost an arm and there was a pool of blood beneath him. Despite having mortal wounds and his body covered in blood, Vikar began to move. Sarah's attention fixed on him and her eyes began to shine with confusion. She started to observe our boy in silence. Supporting his hand on the ground, Vikar began to gaze toward the floor and prepared to stand up. Seeing that he had not died after receiving the last attack, she could not help but wonder if he was really human. Sarah began to walk toward our boy. The mere act of standing was exhausting. Even with the ability of the healing salamander, Vikar could no longer heal his body. Vikar began to remember when he had embraced Camus Morgi with tears in her eyes, and with a sad gaze she asked why she was alone again. With his body trembling, Vikar decided to get up and move. The curtain of smoke began to disappear and despite missing an arm, Vikar drew the Beelzebub sword and began to walk toward the demon. Just then, Camus Morgi called Vikar an idiot, mentioning that she didn't want to see him again just to see that expression. Vikar's attention, who had a bruise on his eye, was fixed on Sarah and his eyes widened in surprise, leaving him in shock. Sarah's eyes began to shine with confusion and rage, since she didn't know what was happening. Camus Morgue began to remove the demon's skin from her face and her eyes began to shine with confidence. With a smile she said that she had done just as Vikar had said. Seeing this, Sarah panicked and reminded her that if she resisted the contract, her soul would be shattered. Using both hands, Camus Morgue began to remove the demon's skin from her face and neck, and with a confident smile admitted that Sarah couldn't last long, asking Vikar to cut her into pieces. She also revealed that if Vikar failed, then her neck would become his sheath. Our boy started to gaze toward the ground and let out a sigh. A smile appeared on his face upon seeing that she was making jokes in this situation. Realizing that she had truly been born to be a heroine, he decided to give her 100 points out of 100. Camus Morgue took off the demon skin she had on her neck, and with a smile asked if Vikar had realized that now. She extended her hand toward Vikar, asking him to show her the man she had fallen in love with. Sarah's eyes filled with fear, knowing that this was not good. Sarah took control of Camus Morgue's body again, making a magic circle appear behind her back. According to her, they were crazy. With a furious gaze, she extended her hands and asked if Vikar really believed that this would be enough to pierce her at that moment. Tentacles made of skeletons shot out from the magic circle toward Vikar. Vikar drew his sword and the blade began to emit an intense mana. Our boy started walking toward her and swung the sword with precision, cutting the tentacles into pieces. Sarah's attention focused on our boy and her eyes widened in surprise, leaving her in shock. Vikar's heart began to shine and mana started to emerge from it. He realized that this was what Hugo meant when he said the heart had so many emotions. He could feel emotions that he normally did not feel. Camus Morgue was trapped with her arms tied inside the demon's third eye. She was happy that Vikar had not forgotten about her. With a sad gaze she began to lift her head. Gradually the light began to enter. Upon seeing this, Camus Morgue's eyes filled with tears and joy. Vikar cut the demon's third eye, and with a smile sat right in front of Camus Morgue, and began to observe her with a joyful gaze. Upon seeing this, her jaw dropped in surprise. Vikar was angry because the heroine of the future was hurt, and he was sad because she was fighting alone. But he was also excited to have the perfect reunion of them. That was what was inside him. Vikar clenched his fist tightly and an intense mana began to emerge from his sword. The eyes of our boy began to shine with excitement, and with a smile he swung the sword. In an instant, Vikar pierced through Sarah's body and appeared behind her. The demon froze in fear, not knowing what was happening. She turned her head and her eyes began to shine with confusion. Vikar turned his back on her and started walking away. At that moment, Vikar's mana began to enter her body, causing her terrible pain. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,